The whole reason most of us get into this business is because we buy into the dream of passive income. If you're managing your own properties, that's not passive. That's you going out, just like Nick said, going out and painting it, or Allison said, going out and changing a faucet, right? That's not passive. If you're going out and putting the eviction notices on the door, I would rather let somebody else do that. The best use of our time is going out and finding other deals and continuing to scale and bring in more stuff.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today in this apartment investing panel, where we will be exploring the unique challenges and opportunities associated with multifamily and apartment investing. And we're going to pay a particular emphasis on scaling from single families and smaller multifamilies to larger apartments. That's kind of going to be the theme of this panel. You will be hearing from three panelists today who own, operate, and asset manage apartments, and we'll be offering practical insights on maximizing returns, managing risk, and scaling your portfolio effectively. So now let's meet our panel. Right in the middle is national speaker today, Anthony Chara. Anthony is a seasoned real estate investor with over 22 years of experience. He has owned or managed several successful multi-million-dollar companies during that period, and he owns and or has syndicated approximately 1,600. Is that still right?
Yeah, that's an old thing there. So we're over 2,100 now.
Over 2,100 apartment units around the country. He has also mentored several thousand aspiring real estate investors. And you can hear Anthony speak later today or later this morning at 10:30 in rooms EF, and his topic will be building generational wealth, increase your wealth exponentially with multifamily properties. Right next to me is Allison Coetsier. Allison is an associate broker with Compass Real Estate Services, and she has been a real estate owner and investor for over 20 years. Allison owns just under 100, just under 100?
Yeah.
Just under 100 B and C class units, including single families, small multis, and smaller apartment complexes. Allison is also the #1 seller of multifamily properties as a realtor in Greater Grand Rapids over the past 15 years. And Nick Wyma is the Director of Property Management with Wyma Properties and Lakeside Real Estate Services, which owns and manages over 250 doors. And he's been investing for 12 years in B-class apartment communities, single-family homes, and commercial buildings. Multifamily is hands down his favorite asset class. And Nick is also a third-generation RPOA member and the current RPOA president. So let's give it a hand for our panelists here. So since we're going to really kind of emphasize the theme of scaling from singles or smaller multifamily to larger apartment communities, so why don't we go just kind of across the board and give us a sense of A to Z, kind of where you started with your real estate and kind of what you've grown that to and the size of the apartments that you've been able to scale to. And Allison, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I started buying properties with my dad thought it'd be a good idea for us to get into rental property kind of in the late 90s. So we bought a 4-unit and then kind of, learned some things there, learned a lot of things that we shouldn't do. And then we thought that because of the financing, it's obviously easier to get financing for the 1 to 4 families. So we kind of stayed in that niche for a while, ended up maybe with, 40 or 50 kind of single to small multi-units. And then gradually over the years, paid those down, paid those off, and then used that cash flow to get into some bigger projects down the road. That's the quick story.
Yeah, and we'll come back and dig into the details and that on the next round here. But Anthony, give us a little insight into how you kind of started small and then grew bigger.
My wife and I started buying single-family homes back in '93. As a matter of fact, our very first rental was our home that we lived in. We turned it into a rental, moved into a larger, nicer home. And then we did that for about 10 years until we met a couple of mentors. One of them was Robert Allen. Some of you have probably heard of him. He's got a book called No Money Down. Became one of his proteges, paid him a lot of money, but it was worth every penny because we didn't even know that you could do things like wholesaling, fixing and flipping, and of course, buying apartment buildings. And we didn't know you could buy properties creatively either. So that kind of opened up our eyes to go on to the next level. And we had probably about 9 or 10 single-family homes and condos at that point, and realized that I didn't want to keep doing single-family homes. There needed to be a better way of getting this stuff done. So at the same time, not only did I meet these mentors, but I also met my original partner, George Antone, and we started going out and buying multifamily properties. And we also realized that in order to scale, that we had to do something called a syndication because we didn't have that deep pockets to go out and buy 100-unit properties. And we started building up our network, raising money from other people, and then going out and buying multifamily properties, 100, 120, 140, 150 units at a time. And that's how we've kind of grown the business from about 2004, 2005 until today.
Great. Nick, before you go, how's the audio in this room? Is everyone able to hear? Anyone have? Okay, everyone's good. All right, excellent. Thanks. Nick, go ahead and fill us in on yours.
So I've been surrounded by real estate at some level pretty much my entire life. I grew up, I swear my grandparents were always painting their rentals. They painted them top to bottom. Every time there's a vacancy, they spend months painting. My dad had some apartments, and growing up, I would assist with pulling out carpet and putting late notices on doors, but it was always kind of just there. And my dad was a home builder. And when the market tanked, we started buying some single-family homes, flipping them, and realized, why are we getting rid of these? Let's hold on to them. And shortly thereafter, we realized it's a lot of work to have a lot of single-family homes, and we slowly have switched into the multifamily, mainly because we just find it a lot easier to manage.
All right, so I'd like to kind of talk about the paradigm shift between thinking of the single families or the smaller multifamilies and going toward larger apartments. Like take us, and you kind of touched on this, but take us through some of the thought process. Like, why did you decide that, okay, it's time to scale? And when you did that, what were some of the immediate steps that you took? And Allison, we'll just kind of go down and start with you.
Yeah, so I would agree with Nick in the labor intensity of it. So in the beginning, when certified buying rental property, my father and I we did all the turns, we did all the maintenance. I used to put a mower in my car and drive around and mow the lawns, through the neighborhoods. And it's a lot of work to, get that specific light fixture for that specific house, or, the sink that fits in that tiny bathroom in that weird cut up, older home that someone retrofitted to a 4-unit. So with apartments, you get the same layout. So you know exactly what tenant you're getting. You can keep flooring and paint and all that stuff usually stocked on the property. Usually you can have, depending on the size, but you can have some on-site management, or at least have, someone who's in charge of just, that unit. So it makes management a lot easier. So that was really one of the perks. And then certainly the cash flow, if you looking at my numbers, still own some single family houses, but the numbers on the single families, even versus the small multis, the small multis always outperform the single families. So just from a cash flow standpoint, it makes a lot of sense.
Anthony?
Yeah, for me, it was an easy transition because the one thing I didn't want to do was what they were doing. I didn't want to go out and paint all these different homes and condos. I didn't want to mow the lawn. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I'd rather be out golfing, snorkeling, scuba diving, going someplace and doing something. So when it got to the point where we had the 10 houses and condos, it became more of a mindset thing because I knew that I didn't want to keep doing that. And matter of fact, a lot of the stuff that we ended up buying out of state because that way it even made it easier. We had to have a property manager take care of the properties. There was no way I could even be tempted to go over there and do one of these things. And so at that point, it just became a matter of wanting to scale and realizing that I needed to go to the next level. And then as soon as I changed my thought process, things just started popping out of the woodwork. Different mentors showed up, George showed up, and we started putting things together and realized what we needed to do to get to the next level, which was raising money, started attending events like this all around the country, started teaching classes on how to invest in apartments, small multifamilies, then larger multifamilies, and started building up our list so that when we really wanted to start scaling up and raising money, we had a database that we could go to of other people that wanted to invest with us. So I didn't want to have to worry about the day-to-day operations. I'd rather be what's called the asset manager, where you oversee the property managers and let the property managers, who hopefully enjoy what they're doing, do what they enjoy doing, so that I can be out doing, and my wife and I can both be doing what we enjoy doing.
For me, I think it's similar to Allison. When you realize how long it takes to turn over a single-family home, and to your example, you get into a tub shower valve, and you realize this is from the 60s, and you're going to 5 different hardware stores saying, do you have this? I don't know what it is. I think I need to fix it. And going to the multifamily where everything's the same, you can have parts on hand, your staff, as you grow, you can bring on staff, and they can be experts in your buildings, and there's very few problems that they haven't come across before. Turns can go from 2 to 3 days instead of 2 or 3 weeks. That's probably one of the biggest things. That it was at that point where we realized every time we have a single family home open, we all just dread it. It's just so much work of not knowing what's going to happen when we open that door. When we have an apartment turn, it doesn't really matter how bad it is. All of our contractors are prepared. They know the layouts. They know the dimensions for carpet. We have trim on stock, and our staff can just go in and turn them and be done with it and move on.
It becomes more of an assembly line.
Correct.
So what about trading one headache for another? I mean, when you talk about the challenges of owning the smaller properties, but as you scale and you become an asset manager more than a property manager, what are some of the new challenges that you face that you didn't face when you were at a smaller scale? And Allison, we'll just start it with you.
Well, certainly, as if you have rental property, you're aware that the more people you put together in a space, the more likely there is to be some sort of conflict. So I think there's a little bit more of that. The larger you get, even going from a duplex to a fourplex, there's a difference in tenant contact and tenant interaction. So I think if you're going to, a 48 unit or 120 unit, there's going to be a lot more of that. Although I think in those larger multis, those tenants are used to that. So there's a little more maybe expectation that there's going to be some of that. And you have the right people in place to deal with those petty kind of tenant grievances. And, for me in the kind of the B, C class where I am, it's not, the expectation is different. So I think it works just as easily as it does maybe in a duplex, in my experience.
I think for us, the big thing is when you have the single families and small multis, you're your own boss. You're doing everything yourself. You have nobody else to answer to except yourself. The biggest hurdle for us is, of course, finding the right property manager to take over the properties for us. Because there's a lot of them out there that we've interviewed over the years that, as I say, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. They answer all the questions fantastically, right? Every question you ask them, how are you going to handle this? What are you going to do in this situation? How are you going to take care of that? They nail it. And then as soon as you hand them the keys to the castle and they start putting it into action, they fall flat on their face and they don't do what they said they were going to do. And so that's the biggest thing, especially when somebody else is managing the property for you. You have to put your trust in the right company or the right person in order for them to run the property the way that you want it run. So that's a big learning curve that you go through. And it's one of those things that you don't be afraid to get rid of the management company if they're not doing what they say that they're going to do. Have a conversation with them. Don't just freak out and fire them, right? Because you do have a contract and you have to make sure you follow the rules in the contract. But you have a conversation with them. They're people just like you. And if they're not doing the things that you need them to do or want them to do or thought they were going to do, you let them know. You try and work through the issues to see if they can do a better job. And if they can, great. If they can't, make a change. Bring in somebody else. So we've had I've had actually one student in particular that was having issues with their manager. And for over a year, he kept saying, because I kept telling him to fire them and bring in somebody else. And his comment was, well, what if I get somebody worse? My response is, what if you get somebody who's better? And he finally did. After about a year and a half of complaining about this manager, he finally bit the bullet and put in a new manager, and his cash flow immediately improved within just a few months. And on 32 units, he was bringing in $5,000 a month in passive income, which was well below $3,200. Actually, was closer to breaking even, maybe $1,000 in cash flow a month. And it just made night and day difference because the previous manager just wasn't doing a very good job for him.
For me, there's 2 things I look back at and think of constantly as we move forward to get out of the day-to-day grind and being willing to give up some of the responsibilities. I think it was about 10 years ago, Grand Rapids got this crazy snowstorm. We got calls at like 3 a.m. that plows weren't even going to go out. We had so much snow for hours. And my brother and I spent 12, maybe 14 hours shoveling our apartments. Just shoveling. And we thought we were saving money. And my brother's a numbers guy, and he had tracked all of our time that winter to see what it actually cost us to shovel. And it turns out we were twice as expensive as if we had hired it out. And it was that mind shift of we can't do everything. And quite frankly, if we're out shoveling snow, we're frustrated. We don't enjoy doing it. We're away from our family, and we're not focused on the big picture of growing and taking care of our asset, or finding new properties. We're in the weeds, too busy doing that type of stuff.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. Great answers, and it kind of, I want to dig deeper into what all of you just talked about when it comes to property management, because a lot of people who own singles or smaller multis really feel like they need to manage them themselves. They need to be in control because they don't want to trust a property management company, or they don't want to pay a property management company. But that's part of the paradigm shift. And I just like to dig in deeper on the answers you just gave about property management and get each of your takes on at what point do you need to let go and bring on property management in order to scale? And then I'll come back and ask you about some of the issues and ways that you manage the property management company. But let's start with at what point do each of you feel that you need to sort of let go and in order to scale, bring on someone else to manage the property? Allison?
Sooner than you think. So looking back on, my career, certainly had I not been doing in the beginning, it's good from a standpoint that I did that for a little bit, so I know what everything should cost. I know how to manage a property manager. I know about city inspections, and I can answer any question they would have. So that does make it easier to manage a property manager if you have actually managed on your own. But I didn't need to do it for that long. So certainly once I stopped doing that and stopped running around with all that stuff, it did allow me to grow the business more. And to Nick's point, from a cost standpoint, own a 48 unit down south and hired a manager, and she was doing an okay job, but it was fairly labor intensive. I had, was driving down there more than I wanted to. Super nice lady, but eventually decided to cut ties with her, ended up paying someone else quite a bit more, but it changed the whole profit picture. And I haven't been to that property in 4 years. So, and I don't worry about it. I kind of casually look at the books each year, but she's just runs a super tight ship. And so if you can find someone that, and don't be afraid, like I said, don't be afraid to get a different property manager if the one you're using isn't working.
Yeah, I get that question a lot from my students, and because they think when you get into multifamily that therefore there's some magic number that you have to have in order to go from managing it yourself to having a property manager. And my answer is the same every single time. How many units do you have to hire a property manager? One. The whole reason most of us get into this business is because we buy into the dream of passive income. If you're managing your own properties, that's not passive. That's you going out, just like Nick said, going out and painting it, or Allison said, going out and changing a faucet, right? That's not passive. If you're going out and putting the eviction notices on the door, I would rather let somebody else do that. The best use of our time is going out and finding other deals and continuing to scale and bring in more stuff. So it was a pretty easy decision to go, once we did our own property, because that's how we started, but we also didn't know what we didn't know. So the next thing that I would recommend that everybody get, quite frankly, is educated and training. And part of that is the guy that was here yesterday, Jeffrey Taylor with Mr. Landlord. My wife and I met him back in the early 2000s, right about the time that we started getting our 6th, 7th, 8th units around the country. And we learned a ton of stuff from him, and we still use it today. We pass on what we've learned to our property managers so that they can become better property managers. And some of them do use it and learn and they grow, and some of them don't and they still struggle, and then we make changes. So it was an easier transition for us because, again, I was more interested in having more time. And when you start looking, like Nick said, when you start looking at how much time you put into some of your deals and you're swapping hours for dollars, and you realize that your hourglass is going to run out at some point, your own personal hourglass. Matter of fact, I got a call last week. My sister passed away. Completely surprised, right? 73 years old, heart just stopped, right? It happens. And so if you're not doing what you want to be doing, you need to figure out how to get there, and you need to get there faster. And one of the ways you can do that is by hiring someone who likes being a property manager. And I don't imagine you go out to the properties much. You probably have employees that go do it, right? Because he's running a business. He may be, a property manager by label, but he's running a business with employees that go take care of those things.
I'll echo what Allison said, sooner rather than later. Simply put, I think people buy into rental properties thinking they're going to have passive income, and all they do is buy themselves a job. And it's a very, very expensive job. And there's a lot easier ways to make income than to buy a rental property to have a job.
Digging into recognizing whether your property manager is doing the job that you need them to do, what are some of the red flags that you look for? And then what are some of the blue flags that you look for where, okay, they are doing a good job? Allison, we'll start with you.
Well, add one thing to the property manager conversation is that, you only need one property to have a property manager. So I have, 50-ish units in Grand Rapids, and I have 3 different property managers managing those 50 units in Grand Rapids based on the different units and those property managers' strengths and weaknesses. So certainly some property managers are good at one thing, some are good at others. And so depending on what property you have, you also have to fit your property with the right property manager. Some property managers do great with old houses. Some property managers, do great with leasing. Some property managers are great at maintenance costs. So don't be afraid don't think just because you have one person doing that they have to do it all, or that you have to stay with just that one company. And as far as how to manage a property, manager, I think you have to, obviously make sure they're going to give you a report that you can understand and that all the costs are going to be there. And then ask them up front. A lot of property managers, they do 7% for this and 10% for that. But, talk to people that are using them. Are their maintenance costs super high? So if you're going to have super low leasing fees, but then your maintenance costs are going to be super high and you have all old buildings, maybe that's not the right property management company for you. Or maybe you have someone who's, their pricing's really great, but it takes them 2 months to turn a unit because they don't have enough staff. So kind of digging a little deeper beyond the, original cost that they tell you up front that you're going to have is, I think, super important.
Excellent advice. The big thing for us is we have, at this point, since we've been doing this for 30 years, we've got 50 or 60 questions that we ask our property managers before we hire them. And some of these questions we learned after we hired them. And some of the things that we do nowadays when we're talking to them is before we buy the property, we will ask our property managers if they will help us create a budget so that if we buy a property, we have a budget to go by to manage it and to operate it. And we've had a couple of managers that say, budget, we don't help with budgets. We literally had one manager, and this is where we learned it, one manager that we had already hired. And during the conversation, because he was spending a lot of money, we asked him at one point if he would help us create a budget. And his exact response was, budget? There's no budget. We just tell you how much to send us to take care of the property and you send it to us. He was fired Unfortunately, it took about 2 months to fire him because we had to find another manager to take his spot. But that's one of the things you want to ask, is especially if you're buying larger multifamily, your property manager should be helping you create a budget. A lot of people think you're buying real estate. You're not. You're buying a business that generates a stream of income. And if you've ever worked for a large business, how many of you ever worked for a large business that didn't have a budget? What the anticipated income was, what the anticipated expenses are. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to stay on track, but you still have to have some type of roadmap or guidelines to go by to make sure that you're performing successfully. So once you have the budget, to answer your question more directly, once you have the budget, now you can figure out, based on your benchmarks, are you getting the income that you need to receive? Are you spending the money that you're supposed to be spending on maintaining it? And there's two different ways to look at it too. There are some people that don't spend any money, which is not good. And then there's some people that overspend on different properties. You have to spend money to maintain your properties. There's no doubt about it, because if you don't, your residents are going to go someplace else. We also look at, one of the other things we look at to figure out whether or not they're doing a good job is occupancy. It's one thing to have high occupancy, but it's another thing to make sure that the people that are living in the property are paying and paying on time and paying the right amount. So you have to look at, on a regular basis, every year or every twice a year, we look at the rental market to see what other competitive properties are renting for. We also look at the occupancy in the market, and we try to make sure that we're hitting those goals or meeting or beating those goals for not only just having the right amount of occupancy or higher, but making sure that the income matches the occupancy. Because it's one thing to have 95% occupancy, but it's another thing to have what's called 85% economic occupancy, where 10% of the people living in the property either aren't paying at all or not paying their full amount of rent that they're supposed to pay. So we can track all those. It's very easy to track those different things once you actually have a budget to go by.
So we self-manage all the properties that we own. So I guess I'll speak on from a different angle on my experience. When we look to acquire a new property, personally, the information that we receive from the current property management company or the property manager can tell you a story pretty quickly. Are there rates all over the place? Are there special deals? Are they buddies with half the tenants on the property, and for some reason they're getting a $150 discount a month? Who's living on the property? Do you have staff on property? There's a lot of issues when you have maintenance and property managers live on site. They get too close with tenants. Those are the type of things that we look for when we're evaluating the new property. And that stuff comes really quickly. When you start asking for financials and rent rolls and it's a mess, you know how the property's been run.
Yeah, the other disadvantage with, like you said, with managers living on site is sometimes then they never leave the job, because if the residents know they're there, they could be knocking on the door at 9, 10 o'clock at night saying, hey, my power went out. It's like, okay, well, the power's out in the whole complex. Why are you coming to bang on my door, right? This is an issue with the electric company. And so sometimes they can get burned out too by being there, and the residents thinking they can just go knock on the door any time of the day or night. Now they're there 7 hours or 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and that's not necessarily good either.
And so in looking at the reports and what the information is you want to see from your management company, can you dig a little deeper into what those reports should be? What are some of the, like, you want a rent roll, financial information. What exactly do you look at every week or every month to make sure that the numbers are where they need to be?
Most property managers will obviously provide some sort of online report or, email you something that's going to have, whatever cost they spent on each unit, in that month. And I just like to make sure that, for whatever repair it was, that the costs seem in line. And I don't, look at every line item every month, but just making sure that, if there was a cost that seems out of line, if there's some plumbing repair and, it says $800, I'm going to want to know what that was. And then along with that, with property managers, it's important to find a property manager who kind of shares your same ideals, meaning that some property managers are Band-Aid people. So everything that needs a fix, they're going to go out and put a Band-Aid on it because they assume that property owners don't want to pay any money. And there's some that don't, but if they Band-Aid everything, then eventually you get a property that needs some major repairs. So you need someone who's willing to kind of keep the property in that, as Anthony was talking about, that sweet spot where they're doing the CapEx stuff, they're doing the preventative maintenance, but they're not over improving the property beyond what tenant class you're looking to rent to. So that's super important.
Yeah, along with looking at a profit and loss statement, one of the first things we look at is something called the delinquency report. We want to see how many of the residents are on site that aren't paying or are behind on rent, and then find out why. Sometimes it is a financial hardship. Something happened. Somebody got ill, they're getting a divorce, somebody passed away. There's all kinds of different things that can happen. So we want to find out what's going on, who is delinquent, where are they at in the process? Have they notified them that their rent is late based on the local laws? I had a call last month with one of the property management companies, and rent is late after the 5th. They're supposed to post on the 6th. We're having our monthly call on the 10th. And I happened to ask them when I think we had 4 out of 60 units were vacant, or not vacant, sorry, behind on rent. And I said, okay, have they been posted, the pay or quit notice? And they said, we'll get that this afternoon. It's like, we'll get to it this afternoon. It was supposed to have been done on the 6th. Residents talk, and if you don't keep up with the letter of the lease and follow up exactly the way you're supposed to, they'll start taking advantage of it. The next thing you know, it's not the 10th, then it's the 12th, then they pay on the 15th, then they pay on the 20th, and it starts getting out of hand. So the big thing we look at is the delinquency report to find out what's going on and talk to the managers to find out what the situation is. We also look at the vacancy report. We also look at both the income and the expenses for the entire month to see where we're at. And just like Allison said, if all of a sudden, I'll be looking for a month long, what's called a T12, a trailing 12, and if all of a sudden there's 1 month where something like plumbing all of a sudden jumps up, you want to know what's going on. It doesn't mean that the repair didn't need to be done, but we want to find out what exactly happened. What was the repair? Was it an emergency? Did it cause other damage? Because if you have water damage on a property, that can be not just the repair bill for repairing the leak or whatever the problem was, but now all of a sudden you potentially have carpet and drywall and paint and other things that go along with repairing the damage. So you want to understand what's going on to see what you can do to correct it or prevent it in the future, because sometimes you can find out that the problem that's happening could be something that you need to address in all these other units. And if you find out earlier and now can start addressing it as preventive maintenance instead of emergency repairs, that'll save you a lot of time and trouble as well. So we check the profit and loss statements every single month to make sure that we're on track. If there's any anomalies, we have that conversation with the manager to see what's going on. But again, you have to have that budget. You have to have that information in hand. It doesn't mean you're going to stay on track, because occasionally we all get detoured. I get detoured yesterday going back to my hotel. They closed the whole freeway down. All right, you have to get off the road. Your GPS adjusts and you find a different route. It's going to happen. But you have to have the roadmap to start with, and you have to check that roadmap every month.
Nick, the reports that you're looking at internally to make sure that you're on track with your properties.
Sure. I spent a lot of time also with looking at the delinquency report. There's a lot of information you can gather from there. Is there a name on that list that's just consistently on there? They pay, but then they're back on. They have the check bounces. It's very easy when you scale up to, when you have a lot of residents, for that tenant to get a lease renewal. And it may be time to move on. If that tenant is your number one problem that you're constantly going to court with, constantly sending notices, you're investing a lot of time with that one tenant. It may just be time to, we're going to go our own ways at the end of the lease period and move on. And if you don't watch that, like I said, that tenant can easily get a renewal if you're not careful with that. So communicate with your staff. Hey, who are the tenants that are causing us the most problems? Is there a tenant who is just a complete jerk to the staff and really affects their daily activity and their work performance? We also look at occupancy. We have a property that we built and have owned for 36 years. That property just hums. It just doesn't cause problems. And we can pat ourselves in the back and say it's doing really well. But then we can look at it and go, we've been 100% occupied for a long time. We probably have some problems with our rates here. We probably need to reevaluate what we're doing here, because we're just not ever turning something over.
Is it for sale? Okay.
It's just not.
What? More specifically, if you have 100% occupancy, it means you're not charging enough for rent.
Correct.
And your residents love you.
Yeah, please.
So that's probably to me, the biggest thing. I sit in some networking groups with other property managers. And if you're sitting with people that self-manage and you're sitting with property managers, the people who self-manage will always have a higher rental rate than the property manager will. So that is something, Anthony touched on it before, but I think it's super important is making sure if you're not, especially if you're not in that market, I'm now in this market, I know what rents should be. So I make sure that the property managers are setting the appropriate rates. But if you're not in that market, you need to do enough research or talk with someone, maybe not the property manager who's on the ground, and make sure that the rental rate is correct. Because I do think with property managers, for them, occupancy rates are important. They know what reports we're looking at. So, you don't want them to be so high that, the place is sitting, vacant for the month, because then it doesn't make any sense. But you want to find that, that sweet spot where you are getting kind of slightly below maximum rent that keeps them occupied, but that you're not giving up $100. If you're giving up $100 on a month on every unit he has, that's a lot of money. So you have to be, and to most of us, if you're giving up, $1,000 a month, that's a lot of money too. So.
Jeffrey Taylor said something really interesting yesterday about being afraid of giving your tenants a increase. When you do that, at some point they're going to move out and they're going to pay market rates somewhere else. And I think that's one of the biggest things I stuck in my head yesterday was, I don't know how many times I've been hesitant to give a tenant, they've been here for 15 years, just give them a little increase. And then they tell you they're moving to the new market rate apartment next door that's $1,800 a month versus $1,200, right? And all you're doing is taking that away from you and the property's performance. It's very easy to do, especially if you're emotionally tied to your properties, but it's a big mistake.
So all of you are up here because you own large apartments, multifamilies, you've had great success. But the last question before we go to Q&A is, what could you be doing better? Where do you think that you're not firing on all cylinders and you need improvement? Allison, we'll start with you.
So all my properties are managed by a property manager. I probably, because a lot of my units are local, I probably do a little more oversight, and I'm not sure if I should or, if I have to or I don't have to. So for me, it would be, making sure that they're doing more of the things that I think I should do. So I'm not doing any of the actual repairs, but I probably do a little more of kind of looking at units and maybe deciding what should happen on a turn than maybe I should. So maybe still taking another step back.
Yeah, I can't think of anything I would be doing better. For me, I think it's probably not analyzing enough deals and not actually continuing to scale. At some point, like right now, especially with a lot of people taking a seat because of interest rates going up as high as they have, you can still find deals that work, but just slowing down and not continuing to analyze. I used to analyze probably 10 deals a week before COVID, and now things have slowed down a little bit. I maybe do 1 deal a week, and I need to pick that back up. You shouldn't be sitting on your laurels unless, of course, you are comfortable. I'm not necessarily comfortable. I do like the travel and stuff that I do. I like going around the country and meeting a lot of great people that get into real estate investing and have the similar philosophies. But at the same time, you got to keep things going, because at some point you're going to need to sell a property. As a matter of fact, one of the things I'll talk about earlier this morning is continuing this conversation is scaling your business and why you want to scale your business and not just let your property sit there being paid off, because there's so much more that you're missing out on with the appreciation of upscaling to larger properties and continuing to grow that business. And that's the scale that the point that we're at now, where we need to continue to scale up.
So I talked about earlier about not doing everything. When you have a stake in properties and you're emotionally tied to them, it's very hard to let go and let somebody else do that. I think that's one of the things I've been focusing on more over the last couple of years is hiring the right people, paying people well to do a good job, and let them be your star. I think we all can, well, I'll just say it. It's easy to say I do the best, right? Because I've done this for so long or whatever. But then you find the right person and you realize they're a lot better than I was at it, and they actually enjoy it. I think that's been one of the hardest parts for me, is being able to step away and let someone just be the rock star in their field and do really well, and give them the rope to be successful. Not looking over the back and questioning things. Let them make some mistakes, like we all have too, learning, because as they become more successful for your properties, you're more successful.
We're going to go to Q&A here. We got any questions?
It sounds like pretty much all of you have said that the number one benefit of owning large apartment complexes is you have to let go and trust your managers. Why don't you just do them? If you have 100 houses, why can't you just do the same?
Well, I think you can. So I think, to Anthony's point, we would suggest property managers for, all things. And that does create more time where you can, do the things you want, because none of us know how long we have here. So you might as well enjoy what you're doing. So, and if, I guess some people really enjoy painting units, and if that's your jam, then great, rock it out. But, just having time. Time is so much more valuable than money. And when you embrace that idea, your life will change.
Yeah, I let mine go a long time ago, so I'm good.
I think it's the complexity of it. It's very hard to systematize large-scale single-family homes. I mean, Warren Buffett said back in 08, 09, if he could buy 3,000 single-family homes and manage them, he would, but he just knows that's not possible. You can't do that at large scale, and it's very hard to systematize. I mean, one of the great parts about this industry is we kind of revolve on a 30-day period, right? Your tenant pays on the first, and you go through the 7-day notices, and you can really put a system in place for dealing with a lot of problems and speeding things up. But single families just add a lot of complexities to it.
So one of the things with small scale operators, single family homes, is that they get a cash flow and they pocket the cash flow or they spend it, and they don't reserve for future CapEx. Can you talk about how you do reserves for CapEx planning for big apartment complexes?
And CapEx being capital improvements, things like new roofs, boilers, things like that.
We'll let you take that one.
Okay.
Since you're.
No problem. So our absolute minimum on any property is $300 per unit per year, which works out to $25 per unit per month. That's our minimum. The next thing we do is we then go in and we look at the large items that are going to need to be replaced at some point, like roofs, parking lots, boilers, chillers, potentially siding. And what we do is a cost analysis. So let's say we have a roof that needs to be replaced, or a lot of roofs that need to be replaced, and let's say that's $500,000 within the next 10 years. And how do we know that? We have several roofers come out, they inspect the property, they tell us what condition the roof is in and how long they think it's going to last. So if they tell us it's going to be approximately 10 years and it's $500,000 in today's money, we take that $500,000, we divide it by 120 months, and then every single month, what we do is an automatic, along with that $25 per unit per month that we automatically transfer in the middle of the month. And we usually do it right after we get our payment from our property manager. Our property manager collects the money, and then usually somewhere around the 15th-ish, they take that money and they transfer it to us. So once we get the money, usually between the 15th and the 20th, we have an automatic transfer set up that it takes that $25 per unit per month, and it transfers it. Well, on top of that, we take whatever that number is, that 500,000 divided by 120 months, and we add that to that same $25 per unit, and we transfer that over, and it's like clockwork. So that way, right, in 10 years, we may not have all the money. I like to talk with my hands, sorry. We may not have all the money, but we have a heck of a lot more because we ran into this the hard way. I had a partner many, many years ago that I don't partner with anymore, who we had an issue on one of our properties where we had this huge rainstorm down in Jackson, Mississippi. And a lot of water came down the side of a hill that was next to our property, went into the units, and ended up wiping out a couple of the units. We also had some foundational issues because there was one building where it actually washed out the foundation, and two of the units on the end of the building actually separated, and you could actually see them physically like this. And for the 4 years we owned the property, after that, we could never rent those units because we didn't have the money to fix them, because that's how I found out he never even set any money aside. The other weird part about it is we had a creek flowing through the middle of the property, and I was surprised to find out that our lender did not require flood insurance. And my partner thought $10,000 a year for flood insurance was way too much, but we ended up spending, it was going to cost us $40,000 per building, and there were 3 buildings that had issues. So how was that $10,000 insurance looking now with $120,000 in repairs that we couldn't do because we didn't have any reserve set aside? So along with the roofs, we look at things like boilers, chillers, parking lots. How much is it going to cost us to repair them or replace them when they need to be repaired or replaced? And then stack all that money on top. So every single month, we're doing that automatic transfer into what we call our reserve account, from our working account to our reserve account, so that we don't get surprised and shocked when all of a sudden we have to come up with that money and realize that we have no money there. It's there and we can use it. And of course, if we don't use it and sell the property, that money's ours. We can take it back and give it back to ourselves or our investors.
Yeah, I would say with whether you have one property or 100 properties or 1,000 properties, you should certainly have a reserve or a CapEx account, and you should certainly have a tax account. So those things should come out automatically each month without you touching it. So, depending on what type of properties you had, you should know what CapEx expenses you're going to have for those particular properties. You figure out the life expectancy, it's simple math, and then you religiously take that money out so that it's there.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next question here.
All right, hi. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm looking at investing in my first property, so that's why I'm here. I've been pestering Brian for the past year about stuff. I'm in the corporate world. I've been in the corporate world for 30 years, and I'm kind of looking at an exit plan and would love to be involved in real estate. So I've really been intrigued by apartments, and that's what I've talked to Brian about in the past as well. But my question is regarding the property manager. I interviewed a property manager at an apartment complex recently because I heard everybody loved to be there and the reviews were amazing. And when I talked to the property manager, she was just employed by, she was not with an outside property management group. She was actually an employee of the property owners. And so I just wondered, I guess this is probably more specifically for Anthony, but in your experience, are you usually working with a larger property management organization, or do you try to find people that are going to be really good employees for you and manage that property?
Yeah, great question. We've done it both ways. I actually prefer to use a property management company. The reason for that is that the partner that I don't use anymore, he used to like to have those employees, those managers, be his employees at his property. The problem you run into is if that employee gets sick or quits, now what do? There's nobody there to fill in for that person because they were your employee, and now either you or somebody else, right, has to go in, or one of the investors has to go in and kind of fill in temporarily to be the property manager. I don't want to do that. So we generally go around and we find a property management company in each area where we have a property. So that way, if one of their employees gets sick or quits, they have to fill in, right? They have to find somebody else to put on that particular property. It also, to me, it also gives you an extra layer of protection. If that employee works for you, then if they do something wrong or violate fair housing rules, it comes back on you as the owner. If you're hiring an independent company and that independent company is the employer of those managers basically, if they screw something up, more liability falls on the property manager than on the owner. But don't get me wrong, we've been in this business long enough. People will find any reason to sue you. And sometimes they do try and come after you as the owner as well. And that's why you have to have good insurance and good attorneys.
I'll take a couple more quick questions here. Yeah,
Thanks. I'm curious about your perspective on accounting. So going back to the CapEx question, when I do single families, I'm doing pretty much cash basis. I'm assuming you're all doing accrual basis. Is there a delineation where it makes sense to move to the more complex accrual basis? And how do you manage your books? Do your property managers, are they inside your books managing it, or do they do something and then path it to you and then you add in your financing? Just curious on your perspectives.
We keep things simple. It's numbers are numbers. I think the bigger thing is making sure your numbers are accurate and your books are up to date. Yeah, keep things simple.
In our case, it depends on the property. Sometimes our property managers have their own bookkeepers and they all have management software that tracks all of that information. We then take that information. If they don't have a bookkeeper, we give it to our bookkeeper who takes care of the month-to-month basis, and then that just all gets turned into our CPA. And most of our properties are, quite frankly, still on cash. I prefer cash myself over accrual. And then also it depends on our CPA. We've had some CPAs that prefer cash. We have some that prefer accrual. So a lot of times, depending on who the CPA is for the different property or the investment, we'll let them make that decision as long as they work with the managers. I just look at the profit and loss statement. I let them carry the heavy load of figuring out whether or not the taxes are right and accurate and getting them filed on time.
The next question.
Hi, as you're scaling up from 2 to 4 unit properties to commercial, at what point, what size property do you start wanting to do like a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental audit, as you acquire the property?
A lot of that's going to be determined if you don't know what that is. Phase 1 and phase 2 is your lenders will generally require that a company kind of look into what's potentially happening environmentally at your property, whether it's contaminated groundwater, contaminated soil, Some of that with a phase one they can do on a computer because they can look and see if there's been a gas tank rupture at a gas station nearby, if there was a chemical plant nearby, dry cleaning store nearby, something like that. And if there's any type of idea that maybe there could be some contamination, then you step into phase two. Phase two, one of the things that could happen is environmental company could come out and start drilling holes in your property to take dirt samples and possibly water samples to see whether or not your soil or something like that's contaminated. The worst one that we had was on a property in Indianapolis. There were 17 buildings, and when the bank came out to do their inspection, they were looking at the fact that there were pipes coming out from the basement to connect to where there used to be heating oil tanks. Well, all of them had been converted to natural gas many, many years before, but nobody had any records to know when the tanks were removed or could prove that the tanks were removed, and they weren't just capped off and still in the ground. So we had to have a company come out and use ground penetrating radar in a phase two study to tell us whether or not those tanks were there. And they had all been removed and everything was good, but that cost us like 16 or 18 grand to go through that entire process. So most of the time it's the bank that requires those studies.
Okay, we have time for one last question here.
Better be a good one.
I'm just curious, as you were transitioning your single-family rentals into scaling into larger properties, do you keep them in your portfolio? Did you wait till you could 1031 exchange? Did you just bite the bullet and sell and pay the tax and recapture depreciation? What was your strategy, and I guess what would you recommend?
Yes.
A quick answer from each of you.
So I still have some single families and small multis. So I've kept most of mine.
We still have most of our single-family homes. We went through and said which ones don't make sense, which ones cause a lot of problems, or which ones do we just really not like, and we kept the ones we did like.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of everything. We've, just like Nick said, we had a property in Arizona, a single family that was a problem. It was in the middle of nowhere, and it was tough to get it rented when it did go vacant. And so we decided to part ways with that one. We just bit the bullet and took the money. And we had other investments that we went into. As a matter of fact, we invested down in a hotel down in the country of Belize with the proceeds. Couldn't do a 1031 exchange, though, because it was outside the country. But we've done 1031 exchanges. We've sold properties. And a lot of times our investors on our larger properties, we ask them, do you want to sell? Do you want to refinance? Do you want to sell and do a 1031 exchange? And a lot of times the investors just want their money so they can go do their own thing on their own properties. So a lot of times their big properties, we're just selling them, split up the proceeds, and they go off and do what they want to do, and then they pay the taxes on it.
Okay, well, that is it for this panel. I want to thank everyone for being here early this morning to check it out. And let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. Great job, guys. I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.